Hi, I'm Dr. Julie Hobbs, the University of Kentucky School of Music, and I'm going to give you some suggestions to survive learning the Allegretto by Benjamin Godard, the second excerpt for the 2014 Kentucky All-State Flute auditions. This is the fast one, and it really is pure technique. The judges want to see how fast and smooth your fingers can be. Of course, good tone is important, so watch my previous video where I talk about tone and breathing exercises. But this one I thought I would just give you some tips about how to practice repetitively and get really clean fingers, because at 138, which is the recommended tempo for the quarter note, this is a very fast excerpt. One of the things to listen for is as you play the opening theme is the judges are going to be listening for keeping a really smooth line even as your fingers are flying. So be careful that you're not pushing too much air on a certain section, that you're just driving your air as if you're playing a really, really long note. Starting at the beginning, keep it really smooth. And as you drive all the way through, as you get lower and lower, make sure you're not afraid to push some air. That'll help with that crescendo at the very end of that phrase. One of the things is, as you're listening for it, obviously practice it slowly at first and get the correct notes, but don't be afraid to every once in a while throw a fast attempt in it, so that your fingers get a chance to move really quickly and lightly. Be careful that you're not death gripping your flute. You can't move your fingers around fast when they're clutching. So lighten up your technique, and then listen really carefully if you hear any little blips. One of the first spots you're going to find a little blip will be between the 6th and 7th notes, that D to F. So right off the bat, you may hear a little blip between the D and the F, and the judges will be listening for that sort of thing. So as you practice for it, listen carefully that is really, really clean. Watch your fingers a few times. Watch how those fingers go from D, first finger up, D to F. Make sure that the fingers are coming up not too high off the keys, that you're not slapping. Again, that you're not pinching or death gripping either. That'll keep for a nice even transition between the D and the F, D and the F. I like to put my flute in front of my face and practice back and forths, as I call them. So you can just watch gently as your fingers switch back and forth between two notes. Also listen carefully for any note that you might be playing too quickly, and stretch it out. For instance, you know, and that could be different for any person, but I'm going to play it once, and I'm going to rush one of the notes. Did you hear that one right at the beginning? It wasn't very even. So if I notice there's a note that I'm consistently rushing through, I'll stretch it out and be obnoxious about it. And then I'll try it again, and this time less stretched. And that usually straightens it out a little bit. So listen really carefully for any kind of bumps in the road, so to speak. Another way that you can practice that is to tongue it all, because we tend to play much more accurately, technique-wise, when we articulate than when we slur. Also, don't be afraid of those low notes. You got to dig a low C out of there, and you got to crescendo through it. And you ended really strong on that low E flat on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th measure. So you ended really strong on that E flat. That low C should be equally strong. So when you take that breath, don't work so hard. Don't pull back for that low C. Don't try to dig it out. Most of the time when flute players can't get their low notes to speak, it's because we're working too hard. We're over adjusting. We're pulling too tightly. We're aiming too low into our instruments. So when you get to say like a B flat in the middle of the staff, don't adjust. Don't adjust your mouth any lower for those notes. Think of B flat as the point of no return. So that by the time you're in the 1, 2, 3, 4th measure, you should make no embouchure adjustments whatsoever. Don't change your air, don't change your jaw, don't change your tongue, don't pull down, don't pull back, don't move anything. Watch in a mirror. It's harder than you think, because we are really conditioned to working, and really when it comes to the low register, don't work. Whatever you've got to have a really nice sound on that A and the G, leave it, set it and forget it. Notice what happens then when I go for the low C. I'm not not changing anything, okay? So don't go, and you're trying for that low C. The trying is what's getting in your way. So notice what happens when I do adjust, how out of focus it gets. I'm trying so hard to get those notes out. Let it go. And just let the air do the work for you down there. As we continue on at the odd tempo, it jumps up into the third register. That can be really tricky. One thing to watch is that your left and your right hands don't get one off from each other. This is very common in the flute, and I don't know why, but it is very common that while you're playing, your left hand goes from F to E to G, that your right hand jumps the gun, and while your left hand is playing a G, your right hand comes down to play F. And you'll continue to play the next several notes, your right hand one note ahead of your left. This is very strange, but it happens all the time. And so you think you're playing it correctly, but it sure doesn't come out right. And that is usually because the right and left hands got off from each other. So tell that right hand to be patient. If you come off from the F, E, G, F, E flat, that you're going to wait for that F. Tell that right hand, first finger, to wait to come down for that high F, the second F, after you play that G. So, and that'll help clean that up. Also, some technique drilling exercises that everybody knows, but again, articulate them, tonguing them, we tend to play more accurately. Also play in little groups of things. Play 2 notes at a time repeatedly till you get it right, then play 3 notes at a time till you get it right, then 4 notes. Also, I tend to be goal-oriented, so start at the end of the section, especially when the third register stuff, that one measure after the odd tempo, it ends on the D, C, B flat, A flat. I would play that a bunch of times. And then add one note. So I'm going to back up one note and play the E flat. Then I'm going to add one more note and play that 3 times. So that'll be an F. And I'm going to back up one more note and so on. So I would work that the end of that section gets really, really over-practiced rather than the beginning of it. Then one of my favorite exercises for practicing is what I call a 1-minute miracle. Everybody has 1 extra minute that they can spend practicing. No matter how busy you are, you can just set your clock for 1 minute and watch that clock and say, I'm going to spend 1 minute drilling a particular measure. Not a large section, just a small section. In this case, we'll do the very opening of the a tempo, so about halfway through the excerpt when it gets high. And you can just play slowly a couple times, tongued a couple times. Change the rhythm, have some fun. Play the notes, double them up. And again, do chains. And jump around and doodle around and practice again and again and again for exactly 1 minute. That's all it takes, and you'll really drill the technique into your fingers physically. And a minute is longer than you think, but it actually doesn't take up that much time of your day, but you'll get a good workout. So I would do some of those. Also, the suggestion for that section is to play piano, which is tricky for flutes. So be sure when you're playing piano that you play puckered up. So think the P stands for pucker, not piano. It's not pinched either. So you want to think that lower lip nice and floofy, really relaxed. Everything is still pretty relaxed here, you know. I just have a tiny little aperture, and I get it by shutting my mouth, not pinching it closed. So keep puckered up, like you're saying poo, which is kind of silly, but poo, poo, poo. And when you do repetitive practicing, practice the right dynamic and the right articulation throughout so that you're learning that as you go, that you don't have to go back and relearn something or add it later. Think about your best possible tone and the right dynamic as you're doing the repetitive drilling. Don't wait to the last minute to throw that in to the mix. Try to do that early on. My last suggestion at the end is those little double tonguings. think inside your mouth, think of like you're saying the word E when you're double tonguing. Try not to go back to ta, 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 even if you're single tonguing it, or if you're double tonguing it, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta. That's a lot of ta, ka, ta. That's a lot of action for your tongue, and it's going to slow you down, especially in the low register. So I would think T, tiki, 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 tiki. It keeps the tongue higher in your mouth, and that's going to help articulate those notes. Tiki, 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 tiki. So when you start at the bottom, instead of taka, 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 ta, is going to slow you down. Think T. And then also a lot of air behind the tongue. That'll help to propel your tongue, so your tongue is just going to flap around in there as you're learning those notes. This excerpt is a lot of fun, and it's just a fast, wild ride. So careful practice, a lot of repetition, and a bunch of 1-minute miracles, and you should do just fine. Good luck. That was Ave Maria by Franz Schubert, an arrangement by Robert Cavalli. I am Julie Hobbs, flute professor at the University of Kentucky, and I'm pleased to offer some suggestions on how to perform this piece for the 2014 Kentucky All-State Auditions for flute. This particular excerpt is not a technical challenge, so it's not going to be hard to learn or play the notes or move your fingers around. However, the judges are going to be looking for some very specific things. One is your rhythmic accuracy. Make sure when you're playing this piece that you have a good subdivision. So even though it doesn't need to be completely metronomic, make sure you have your metronome set to the recommended tempo of the 8th note at 60. And if you don't have a metronome at home, that's just 1 beat per second. So find a clock that ticks, and that'll tell you exactly your tempo. Now, once you've figured out the metronome marking of 60, that's your 8th note pulse. Subdivide that into even 16th notes. Tut, 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 tut. And that'll tell you where to place those opening notes all the way through. Tut, 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 tut. I would recommend playing through the entire excerpt just one time really straight like that, and almost play those opening C's, play every single one of them instead of just sustaining the long C. Subdivide those. So that you have 16th note subdivisions. That way you can practice placing those notes exactly where they should be placed. And again, the tempo can have a little flexibility when it's the end of the phrase or the end of the excerpt. You can take a little time, or at a high point of a phrase you can take a little time. That's going to be all right. It doesn't have to be completely metronomic, but make sure that you're not playing too slow or too quickly. Also remember that when you're a little nervous, we tend to play too fast. So take a breath and make sure you're playing at a slow enough tempo. The second thing that the judges are really going to be looking for on this piece is going to be tone, always tone. And this particular piece is nice in that it doesn't extend through a huge range, so you don't have to worry about tone color changes in the registers. It's really all just the low register. You want your flute sound to be rich, you want it to be dark, you want it to have some shimmer, but you don't want it to be real bright. So this one's about air support and keeping everything inside really open. Open up your throat like you're yawning. Make sure that the inside of your mouth is open like you've got an eraser between the back molars. You have a little bit of space between your mouth and the back. Try not to be tense and tight. And one of the best advantages to your tone can be your posture, simply put. Have you ever noticed that when we're playing the flute, we tend to bring the flute up to our faces, and it tends to be sort of hunched forward. We tend to have kind of a small sound, especially when we're nervous. We bring the flute up to our faces and kind of bring it in. A great way to practice, and I'm not saying you need to do this in your audition, although you can if you want, is to bring your flute all the way out away from your body, and just to practice, and it's a good stretch too. Bring your flute away from your body like a circle, and you're going to bring it all the way up, and then you're going to bring it down to you. Notice what you end up doing is you bring your head up to the flute. So instead of bringing the flute forward, your head forward, you're going to come down, and it keeps everything up. This is great for posture. It looks confident, you'll feel confident, but you'll also have great air support, which is perfect for tone. It also kind of throws your shoulders back a little bit and keeps your spine nice and straight. Your spine isn't going to be perfectly straight, it's going to have a natural curve to it, but you don't want to be hunched forward. So one of the best things you can do for tone is just fix your posture. Take a slow, deep breath in and practice doing this a couple times with the opening. So again, I would do this just for practice. You would do this, up, bring it down, and then take a slow, comfortable breath in. And then play. You should have plenty of air. Also remember, you're not in a hurry, so when that flute starts, that piece starts, don't take a gasping, quick breath. Even though you're going to be nervous and you're going to be tight, take that slow breath. It'll slower your heart rate too a little bit. It'll relax you, which is what you need. We're all going to be nervous playing in front of people. The next thing I would think about with the breathing is just to remember that the breath is part of the piece. So don't start until you're ready to take that really good full breath. When you hear yourself taking a deep breath, it should sound low. It should sound like Darth Vader. It should be, if you hear yourself going, taking a breath and it sounds kind of high, that breath is not a good, healthy breath. It's tense, it's tight, there's tension in here. You want to drop your mouth, drop your tongue, and suck in air. And you want to do that every time you have a breath. Even if it's a quick breath, it should be low. Okay, so just be mindful of your breaths and how they sound. The second big thing that the judges are going to be looking for in this piece is your phrasing. And we hear that a lot as musicians, to shape the phrase, make more of the phrase. All that means is you identify what you think a phrase is. That's like a sentence in writing, where you think there's a beginning and an ending, and find the high point within that. And the high point can literally be the highest note of the phrase, or it can be the lowest note, but it can also be the loudest note, and that can be up to you to some extent. I think at the very beginning of this piece, the first sort of small phrase is just the very first measure you play going into the downbeat. So it starts on a C, goes up to an E, comes back down to a C. The next phrase starts on a D, goes down to an A, and comes back to the C. And you can think of those two little phrases as being one big phrase, or you can think of them as just being really subtle little phrases. Either way, I think there's a high point in both of those sections. In the first case, the high point is the E. It's the highest note. It's one of the longest notes that you're playing. And I think you should try to shape that phrase crescendo into that high point. All the notes leading into the high point should be maybe crescendoed into it. And then all the notes from there should feel like it's shaping the opposite direction. So you can put a very subtle crescendo into that E and then come back. And then the next measure, crescendo into the A, which in this case happens to be the lowest note of the phrase. That just makes it seem like you are following the natural line, the natural curve of where the notes are going, the contour. The next phrase starts on the third measure that you're playing, and that's this E, and it goes into a nice long E. And this time the composer and the editor give you a crescendo. So you want to bring a lot out into that downbeat of the fourth measure, E. So I really crescendoed into that E and then backed off. The other way that you can shape your phrases is to watch the rate of your vibrato, and this is a big one. The judges are going to be paying attention to your vibrato. Is it too fast, like a nanny goat? Is it too slow, like a wah, 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 wah? Neither of these are good things. What you want is something in between, and you want to be able to control it. You want to speed it up when it becomes more intense, and then back off when the music is less intense. So that follows, again, the phrasing. How you shape your vibrato is not just important on its own, but it also helps with the phrasing. And again, that's going to be one of the big aspects the judges are listening for. So one way that you can practice this, again, is to pick any note that you want. In this case, I'm going to pick the note E natural because we have a lot of long E's on this one. And I'm going to practice just crescendo, or sorry, increasing the rate of my vibrato on that E and then decreasing. So you can hear how the intensity changes on that E. And again, we're going to do coming down and a deep breath. I call those Dopplers, you know, like the Doppler effect in science where something comes closer and then goes further out of range. I would practice that on a variety of notes. Vibrato is something we have to practice. It's not just a natural thing that happens when we play. Be careful that your vibrato is always coming from the diaphragm, that it's ha, 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 like you're having a good belly laugh, ha, ha, or your Santa Claus, ho, 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 ho. You want it to be really low and muscular. It's very unnatural and a little uncomfortable at first, but you don't want your vibrato coming from here. You don't want your tongue moving around in your mouth. You don't want this tense, tight, kind of throaty nanny goat vibrato. That sounds worse, and it also closes off your sound a little bit. So make sure your vibrato is coming from a low place. Pick any note you want. I'm going to pick a G. Again, think bringing the flute down, deep breath in. Start with no vibrato, turn it on, speed it up, then turn it off. And then you can apply that to the actual piece. Again, I'll use that opening phrase one more time for you, and you can listen how I'm going to crescendo my dynamics, but I'm also going to crescendo, essentially, my vibrato rate into the high point, which is that E. So it, again, shapes that phrase for you. The last thing that's really important, and it's always important, no matter if the piece is slow or fast, is intonation. Remember that the key to good intonation is good tone. So if you're playing with good posture and good air support and a good sound, most of your intonation problems are going to go away. The biggest problems we have as flute players is the end of phrases. They tend to go flat. Make sure that you are not using your vibrato, that you're not using your intonation by just changing the air speed. Make sure that your dynamics, rather, are altered by your embouchure. So don't go soft by backing off on the air. Listen to what happens when I play a note and I just let my air slow down. When I try to get softer by just using less air, the pitch goes way flat. Listen to it one more time. Not good. Notice when I also push more air to get louder, it goes sharp. And if I push too hard, it'll pop the octave. So one of the things you want to do is make sure that your dynamics are controlled by your lips. You're bringing things forward to get softer, like you're going, your lip comes forward, your chin comes up a little bit, the jaw moves just a little bit. Everything is very forward, almost like someone's pulling the flute away from you. You're going to keep your air steady at all times. That's going to keep your pitch steady. Listen to this once. And it just comes forward. Again, you'll need to practice that a little bit. Pick any note you want, and for this piece, pick something in the low register. Pick the last note of each phrase. So play a C, then play a G, play a bunch of different notes. And make your lip do the work. And also use your tuner. If you don't have access to a tuner, that's fine, use your ear. Maybe go to your school, use the piano, or play that note and try to match the pitch with the piano. Play with a partner and have them practice with you too if you don't have access to a tuner. And you can probably download some good resources off the internet too. So be sure that you practice with the metronome, with the tuner, and I think if you follow some of these tips, you'll have a very confident, accurate performance. Good luck.